Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ashley Gebb and I'm the Executive Director of University Communications and a longtime fan of the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve. I'm here today with Eli Goodsell, Executive Director of the Reserve, and we are going to chat a little bit about impacts of this summer's park fire on the BCCER and the work that lies ahead. We're really excited for this session to be interactive, so I'd like to invite you to drop your questions into the Q&A. Tell us where you're from and what you want to know about the BCCER and fire recovery, and I'll be asking your questions live in a few minutes. Also, we're going to include a link in the chat to the BCCER's crowdfunding campaign where you can learn more about the recovery efforts and how you can help to support this cause. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that discussing wildfire can be really emotional and bring up a lot of feelings for us. We anticipate some of the conversations we might have today and the imagery we might share could be a little upsetting. As hard as it will be, we're really grateful to have you here and to be able to discuss this with you all together. So with that, let's get started. While you all start adding some questions to the Q&A box, I'm going to kick us off. So Eli, let's start by thinking back to the afternoon of July 24th and walk us through the moment that you first heard about the fire and what you were thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Somewhat ironically, I actually was in a meeting with CAL FIRE when the ignition started down in Chico. I remember I walked into that meeting saying, well boys, it's pretty hot and windy out here. And at the conclusion of that meeting, we walked outside into the parking lot, us and the CAL FIRE representatives, and we saw the column of smoke starting. It was pretty small at that point in Upper Bidwell Park. And so we immediately, I was there with my operations coordinator, my forester, and my fire and flora manager, and we quickly got communications up to the Ecological Reserve and evacuated all staff personnel that were up there, and then did an inventory of people that came out to ensure that everybody made it out of there. And we quickly formed an incident management team leadership that then started following the fire's progress that day and into the next day as well.
And what was the timeline for the fire at the park, at the reserve?
Yeah, so that first day we were pretty confident that that fire was going to impact our extension property, Chocoweo-Dicknonaw, which is out towards the Mud Creek drainage. That fire the first day was a very much wind-driven fire. The south winds were blowing it to the north, and it was long and narrow and kind of shot right up through our expansion property. Where we started getting really worried was the next day, where that fire started to move to more of a train-driven fire and kind of came up over Musty Buck Ridge and then started to back down Bidwell Park and Musty Buck Ridge. And then unfortunately on the 25th, later in the day, it jumped Big Chico Creek and started to make a run up the Big Chico Creek drainage in that canyon. And the canyon is in a way that it widens and narrows throughout, and that fire would pick up speed as it narrowed, and at one point actually twisted off of a rock foundation and kind of created its own vortex, and that's where we saw some really high intensity move through that canyon, kind of at the worst time of day, worst conditions with weather. I think it was 113 degrees out, and winds. So we kind of got the full brunt of it right in the Big Chico Creek Canyon that second day.
You shared a really powerful video with me, and so let's play that now so we can talk a little bit more about the impacts of this fire.
So I'll be silent most of this video, but I will say that here we see some wildlife at this, what is called a game guzzler. We have these throughout the property in areas for animals to access water in areas that don't have natural springs or access to the creek. And you can see them accessing water before they quickly left the property as the fire started moving towards us. So this entire video was captured on one of our more than 30 wildlife game cameras that we have on the property, many of them supported by donors that adopt acres on our ecological reserve. And we have a number of data sets, but this is going to be one of those things that as we continue to develop the story around and the data around the fire, as it moved through, and then also post-fire, these are super critical information for us. But it really gives an idea of kind of the intensity and how that wildfire moved through during the time of day.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the fire move through the landscape and has that kind of calming effect at the end where you see the smoke clear and look at it. So you were able to access the property a few days later. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to return and what you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to visit the property with some of our leadership at the Ecological Reserve, mainly just to go up there, secure it, ensure that some of the safety, mitigate some of the risks up there. We had to shut off the solar and do some other things. And yeah, it was heavy. I mean, we went up and the fire effect looked pretty good, kind of going through Bidwell Park, and that was kind of promising. But as we made our way up the canyon, those fire effects got more and more intense, where by the time we got to the reserve, it was, I didn't see any brush while I was there. That first day, kind of traveling around, I think that I saw, about as much grass that kind of would be the size of this table. So all surface fuels were consumed. All of our structures besides our shop were lost. And yeah, I going there with staff, it was heavy, it was emotional, and it was a real call to action. I think I had this part in me that recognized that we needed to grieve the landscape and recognize that what we'd been managing for the last 20 years wasn't going to be the same. But that part of me kind of stepped aside and said, no, we need action now. We're in emergency. We need to make sure that our staff are safe. We need to make sure that we're protecting the wildlife, and we need to make sure that we're recognizing these burnt down buildings are potential hazardous sites. So, since then I've been able to really process the fire, but in that immediate aftermath, it was all about action. To best support our staff for the critical work that needed to happen immediately, we worked with our forest therapy program manager, Blake Ellis. We formed that program after the campfire to help people, our community, recover after the campfire. And she's been integral in terms of leading our staff and partners, including members of the Mechoopda tribe, down to the Ecological Reserve soon after the fire, mainly to start that kind of emotional rebuilding process so that we can show up and care for the land that we love.
Okay, great. We've got some questions coming in from the audience. Other people, keep adding your questions as we go, but I'm going to start with Sarah, who's from Chico State and the Campfire Restoration Project. She says, thanks for being here, Eli. I'd like to hear how prescribed fire that you've been laying down at BCCER affected the way the fire burned through the property.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I was very curious to know that as well. That first day I returned, a few days after the fire, I saw evidence of how our prescribed fire units fared in the fire. There's area around our headquarters, and then on the north area of the property, about 150 acres that we had burned within the last year. Both of those areas had green in their oaks, where with the fire intensity, there was many trees that were completely torched out. So right now, it's looking good. We have a prescribed fire research crew that is contracted through CAL FIRE to specifically look at prescribed fire and the effects of prescribed fire in the foothill ecosystems of the Sierra Nevadas and Cascades. And so we're utilizing that crew right now to start really measuring effects of the fire in our prescribed burn units. And then it'll probably be a few years before we really understand what the tree survival and what that ecology in those areas look like. But so far, it's looking really good when areas that we put down prescribed fire. And we're really happy that not only are we going to tell that story, but we're able to gather the data to continue that body of evidence of the necessity to increase the pace and scale of prescribed fire in the American West and specifically in the foothill environments.
Okay, thank you. David from Dana Point asks, are there any plans to replace the structures which burned, the house and barn in particular?
Yeah, we're figuring that out. Right now, we recognize that we've got another emergency on our hand, except unlike the fire, this one we know is coming, and that's going to be the winter rains. So while we've got a lot of ideas and we're going to be rebuilding bigger and better than before from an infrastructure perspective, we are just kind of laser focused right now on sediment retention within the Big Chico Creek watershed before our rains come in, and that's we know that we've only got a small window of time, so it's been all hands on deck with multiple partners throughout the region to really push that priority and clean up all these structures that have materials. We've already had the initial hazardous materials removed, so I feel I can sleep a little bit better at night. We're putting in water retention devices kind of throughout the around the structures, and then we'll be cleaning up those structures as well. And then we'll really be working with our community as well as the region and federal partners to envision the infrastructure that's going to be needed for where we're going in the future.
Right. And I think some of the fundraising campaign will be used to help get some immediate needs met out there. Internet, electricity, and things, so that you can have support for boots on the ground who are going to be doing that immediate recovery work, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's critical for us to have a functioning base camp to be able to do this work. This canyon has no cell phone reception, no communications. That's a major safety concern, especially after being burnt over and the hazards that are out there. So, with the support that we've seen from the community so far, we've been able to quickly move on. We've got power being pulled currently as we speak. Internet's going in the next week. And we've got temporary offices that should be up in the next 2 weeks. Then we're going to be the base camp, not only for the emergency ecological work that needs to happen on our 8,000 acres, but for the entire Big Chico Creek watershed.
Wow, okay. Maureen asks, how do you envision the evolution and change in research projects and other opportunities at BCCER?
Absolutely. This is one of the areas that I view this fire as a real opportunity, right? We're in a Mediterranean climate in the American West, we're gonna see large, high-intensity wildfires. We're seeing that, since I came back in 2017 for this position. We've had the Camp Fire, the North Complex, the Dixie Fire, and now the Park Fire just kind of impacting Butte County, right? We now have more forested lands that are in fire recovery than are that haven't had fire in them in the last 10 years. So first off, it's super important to grapple with what it means to manage ecosystems that have been burned over. And we need to gather research to do that. So one of our number one priorities this fall is to be able to accommodate all academic programming. It's going to be a little bit tricky. We have to develop safety plans for each individual activity, but we've got classes that are coming out to visit already that are scheduled, researchers that are coming out to visit. Like I mentioned, we have a contract with CAL FIRE to be doing research specific to prescribed fire. Mm-hmm. So it's also really unique. We've got plots that were literally surveyed weeks before the fire that we're going to be able to go back in immediately after the fire, and there's some data sets that we're able to get that don't exist in the state of California right now. So I truly believe that not only are we going to be able to answer some questions that will assist us to steward these landscapes and ecosystems throughout the American West, but we're also going to be making some students careers out of this opportunity. So there's a real silver lining in that, and I'm excited to continue to do that research.
Great. And I would guess that the wildlife conservation projects, reintroduction projects that you had been already working on, student and faculty research, it'll be finding ways to adapt those to a fire-impacted landscape. Absolutely.
I will say that I've been highly encouraged not only by the community support and individual support we've seen, but all of our funders for multi-million dollars worth of projects have all been super supportive of our work and are recognizing that this is an opportunity for us and for them to have a greater impact post-fire. It's going to look a little different. Some of these things are slowing down as we're facing this ecological emergency coming this fall, but we have had nobody pulling out support in terms of large grant funders, and we're really excited to continue those moving forward.
Great. So you mentioned it several times, the ecological emergency. Yeah. So let's start to talk a little bit about recovery and the immediate action that you're working on.
Yeah, it's been on my mind a little bit, so I'll continue to repeat it. So we very quickly after the fire, after we kind of came in and assessed, initial damages, we really started to look at what the next, ecological thoughts and steps are, and it was recognizing that the vegetation, especially through the ecological reserves and with neighboring properties up canyon, were burnt at such high intensity that we had a real concern about sediment this winter coming into Big Chico Creek. And so pretty much, the majority of vegetation that was pulling water out of our groundwater tables no longer is, above ground and isn't growing actively. So all of that water is now going into the ground table. We're seeing tributaries that are flowing right now that we normally don't see unless it's raining, and it's September. And so we recognize there's going to be much more water coming down off of our hill slopes and into Big Chico Creek. And with all the exposed soil on those hill slopes, there's a major risk of that sedimentation getting into Big Chico Creek and ruining habitat for aquatic life in that creek. So quickly after the fire, recognizing that, we formed a collaborative organization with us, the Machupta tribe, the City of Chico's Parks Department, the Butte County RCD, the Butte County Fire Safe Council, as well as local private landowners, nonprofits, and businesses to solely focus on protecting the waters of Big Chico Creek this fall. And we've been getting permitting for that. And with the speed of it, the only real funding, even emergency funding that comes through the state and federal government, isn't fast enough. The funding that is making this possible is support of philanthropists throughout our community, throughout the region, and throughout the world.
Okay. To hit home the urgency piece again, I know we had talked, we saw here on the Chico State campus, the waters flowing through Big Chico Creek through campus started to look a little bit more like iced tea. I know you shared pictures with me higher up in the canyon where it was more like chocolate milk.
Yeah.
Can you explain again just how when we have traditional winter rains, what that could do to the wildlife and the fish in the creek?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to clarify too, we're going to be trying to hold as much of the sediment, the soil, up on our landscape out of Big Chico Creek as possible. There is going to be sediment that gets into the creek. There will be times that it looks a little bit like chocolate milk, but for every yard of sediment we can keep out, that's a yard that isn't impacting wildlife and habitat of Big Chico Creek. The issue is that when sediment flows into the creek, one, it blocks sunlight and stops algae, stunts the growth of algae and other food for fish and aquatic life. It will actually cover gravel bar and sandbar habitat that is critical for spawning for a number of fish and habitat for aquatic life, and it'll actually suffocate, not only remove that from that habitat, but it'll suffocate any eggs or anything within that habitat. And then it also changes the oxygen levels of the creek, and actually, fish and others can suffocate without that amount of oxygen, including just even getting those dirt particles into their lungs and other things, or into their gills. So it's a major, it is the ecological emergency that we're focused on. It has a potential for a major impact, and the fish will be impacted in Big Chico Creek, but we're going to do everything absolutely possible to make that impact as least as possible.
And you've got smaller projects that'll be taking place as well, like creating cover for birds and things like that, making sure there is adequate water supply through the guzzlers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's, this is kind of our number one emergency pushing out, but while we're also doing that, we're ensuring that, guzzlers are repaired and that they're full, that as we're going in and falling some hazard trees for access, we're also limbing those up, and we're creating ground cover for bird habitat. It was pretty unnerving to see. It was good to see quail down there, but they were all really frazzled because they had nowhere to go, right? There was nowhere to hide on the property. There's no more brush. There's no more brush piles. So creating that cover has been one of our priorities. We've already been doing that. We've created a number of habitat piles. And then it's also going to be taking vegetation and covering our soils. Our exposed soils have that potential to run off into sediment into the Big Chico Creek. And if even covering that with what we call lop and scatter, taking vegetation and cutting into smaller pieces and putting it over the soil, we just disperse those water droplets as they fall, and it's less likely for that runoff to happen. So there's going to be a number of techniques that we use, that being one of them.
Okay. Tim Marie shares that the stream team has water quality data from the reserve from about 2004 to 2022, and they're wondering if there's a way to collaborate on some of this work. Can they help the recovery team to provide input and participate in these efforts to protect water quality in Big Chico Creek?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way for people right now is to reach out to us at our BCCER, BCER, at csuchico.edu email address. And please have patience with us. We're pretty inundated. I've got many people to call and collaborate with and thank for generous support and for their expertise that they'll be able to bring to the field. And right now we're still in emergency mode. Myself and my amazing team are working around the clock to make sure that that we don't have asbestos in our buildings and that they're not running into creeks and things like that. So yes, please reach out and please have patience with us as we leverage your amazing capabilities.
Great. You mentioned the support we've gotten so far. So as of today, we've raised over $122,000 from 314 supporters. So what has it been like to see this outpouring?
Well, first off, I want to recognize that we've had some supporters since we've started this, which is amazing. And honestly, for me, it's a sincere thank you. I mean, I think that many people that are probably watching this webinar have supported or have asked people to support, and it's from the bottom of our hearts, like this support from our community is making our recovery possible. It's laying the foundation for who we're going to become into the future. And I'm overwhelmed. I mean, honestly, it is so humbling, not only to know how much we're valued in our community, but also to know how much we're trusted as stewards of people's resources to truly, manage this watershed for our ecological goals and the future land stewards that are going to be managing this watershed, but also throughout the American West.
I also saw that an additional $30,000 in matching gift funds became available on Monday, which allows our viewers to do more with every donation that we get. So if you would like to make a gift, we are going to pop that link into the chat right now, and your gift will be automatically doubled thanks to this match. So we're so appreciative of these donors who are making these matching funds possible, and of course the University Foundation Board of Governors who stepped forward initially to create some of the funds that got us going. Can you tell us what our goal is and what we're striving for?
Yeah, I told somebody from a local business this just the other week, is that the size and scale of this kind of ecological emergency and really where we're going from here is right now we've got roughly a $400,000 budget for this kind of emergency, but that's what from all the partners that are bringing it to the table. But I the way that I told them is, in the next 6 months I could spend $500,000 or $5 million, and it's really going to be about scaling, and we're moving as fast as possible. We're taking our crews, we're working on our ecological reserve, but we're also working throughout the watershed, right? Because if we could slow down as much sediment through the ecological reserve as absolutely possible, and if we don't do anything on our neighbor's property, on Bidwell Park, that stream's still going to be impacted. So we're going to be working kind of cross-boundary within the watershed, and we're confident that we're going to be able to bring in grant dollars, and we're going to be able to bring in other funding as we move forward. This is going to be a multi-million-dollar project over multi-year, but this initial funding is what's been really critical about us to be able to hit it before these first rains come in and allow us to really hit the ground running with that strong foundation and catch as much sediment as possible this fall.
Great. We've got a few more questions. So Eric, a BCER neighbor, asks, besides monetary donations, how can the public support efforts related to protecting the watershed in anticipation of the rainy season that's coming?
Yeah, absolutely. We do plan on having a volunteer day or two, a couple of them, maybe even some more. We're trying to figure out some of the risk management associated with that. We want to recognize that people have tons of expertise and they have a lot to give, and it's not always monetarily. What our campaign was focused on this at first because that is the easiest way to give right now. But we will be opening up opportunities for volunteer work to help us with the sediment retention. It could be helping build pretty much like wattles that we're going to end up putting into these things that are like considered like one rock dams to slow down sediment in our tributaries, and we're going to need help building those. So keep your ears peeled. We'll be putting things out on our social media. We'll be pushing really hard. We'll be using the university communication as well. And our hope is that in the next few months we'll have a couple of work days for people to welcome people onto the landscape, to see the reserve and really help us hands-on recover. That being said, the other thing you can do is really tell the story, right? Not only the story of what we're doing now and of the opportunity right now, but there's going to be lessons learned throughout this endeavor. This hasn't really been done before, kind of at this scale and at this speed. And so we're going to have a playbook at the end of this that is going to have some really amazing best practices, I hope, as well as some real lessons learned. And so as that gets created, really sharing that out and ensuring that the people that everybody knows that stewards their own little mini watersheds or other areas of California understand kind of our story and what we've learned from this process.
Great. Sarah says, you mentioned quail. I know it's early, but have you seen birds, insects, other creatures returning yet? Have folks that have been studying wildlife at BCCER had any predictions for the effects on the animals that they're studying?
Yeah, so we have a deer survey this week, and it's an annual survey. It's a night spotlight survey, so we're gonna have an idea of that. I've seen rabbit, I've seen ground squirrel, number of different types of birds. Pretty amazingly, our ant colonies I'm seeing, because everything's black, we're seeing their seed storage of them bringing out all of the seed holes, and they're kind of surrounding all of their ant colonies. And so it's really seeing like how much food they have underground, as well as ants are pretty smart. They could be like planting some of those seeds for future growth. So we're seeing some of that. We've seen just the other day, just to the north of our property, I saw a buck and two does, and we're right at that phase right now that we're starting to see stump sprouts and regrowth in a lot of our chaparral and other woody debris, and that's like baby spinach for deer. That's a highly nutrient dense, really tender. That's what they're going for, and now everything's open in terms of accessibility. So I'm expecting to see more of our larger mammal life returning this fall, and then next spring I think it's going to be pretty amazing. Actually, in one of our milkweed meadows, we had about 3 weeks after the fire, we had about 12-inch growth, and now or 6-inch growth, and now we're about at 1.5 feet, and we're already finding monarch butterfly larvae on those milkweeds. So super exciting. Nature's really resilient, and now it is our responsibility and opportunity to kind of take this reset and steward this landscape in the way that really it needs to be stewarded for the long term. So we're hoping that it's going to be a thriving, amazing habitat. And our neighbors in Forest Ranch are saying they're seeing like 30 deer in their yards at night. So the wildlife has moved off, and they're spending more time in the surrounding green right now. But we're expecting as we move into fall, and especially next spring, we're going to see much more wildlife returning.
Great. Some of the points you just made are a good segue into our last question from the audience. So Maureen wants to know, what about the regrowth of natural plants versus invasive plant and vegetation species?
Yeah, so one good thing with the research that we've been doing is that we've got botanical plots kind of throughout the ecological reserve. So we're not planting anything right now. We're going to be waiting until next spring and maybe even 2 years and really look at what's coming back. What we've learned from putting prescribed fire on the ground in the past is even in areas where it gets hot, we'll see that seed bank that's a little bit further down emerge with native species that we haven't seen in certain areas of the reserve, and they'll be there. So we're really excited to see kind of what emerges. Native species are adapted to wildfire. They're adapted to wildfire in August, they're adapted to wildfire in July. So I'm really hopeful around that. And we're already targeting some of the invasive species that we're recognizing that are coming up because they're very obvious. It was kind of the right time of the year for yellow star thistle for us, so we're feeling pretty good about that. We'll see. Klamath weed and some other things that are coming up. You know, we've got access now and we're hitting them pretty hard, and we'll see that first year of kind of what comes up, and then we'll probably be looking at reseeding, especially in some of the hotter spots where there used to be logs that then completely burnt, and now the seed bank has been almost obliterated. Those are real opportunities to come in with the biodiversity of the flora that you want there and actually reseed those areas. So yeah, I'm excited. It's going to be a really amazing opportunity, and right now it's all about kind of bandwidth and figuring out what our priorities are moving forward.
Okay, good. Well, Eli, is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
I mean, I guess I'd just like to share just another sincere appreciation for the interest of what we do up here, for the support of the community, for sharing this message. And I would really encourage people to stay tuned. I mean, this landscape is going to recover, this program's going to recover, and honestly, I think that we are poised now to rebuild our infrastructure in a way that is going to look towards the future of who we are and what we can become. Chico State, the region that we serve at Chico State, is the most impacted by wildfire in the United States. And it is not only our role, but it's our responsibility to be leaders, not only to research, but to develop that next generation of land stewards and land managers that understand how to caretake our lands. And I'm really excited where we're going. We've got support of the university leadership. We've got support from our partners at the state and federal level, and we believe that the future is going to be bright, and we're really excited to have everybody along for the ride.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eli, for making time today, and a really big thank you to all the people who took time to tune in, for your excellent questions. I know that I could talk with Eli all day about the BCCER, but as he's mentioned several times, he has a lot of very important work to be doing right here, right now, so we want to let him go. But as we close, I wanted to end with this really beautiful photo from a few springtimes ago. Amid the sadness that we have and the concerns about the impact this fire might have, we also have so much to look forward to, as Eli mentioned. He shared with me that the wildflowers in the spring are going to be just incredibly beautiful, and hopefully people will be able to go up there and see it for themselves. And we'll be sharing updates with all of you as we continue to recover together. So thank you again to all of our supporters. You are helping BCCER with its mission to steward and conserve this land for future generations and to learn so much about our landscape and wildland management. So with that, thank you, and take care.
Thank you.